We left the boat anchored on the lake for 2 hours while we hiked to a creek upstream. When we came back, someone had been on it. The cooler was open. The fish we caught that morning were gone. Our tackle box had been moved to a different seat, and in the bottom of the boat underneath the bench, where my buddy keeps a first aid kit, there was a wet footprint. Bare, no shoe, no boot, a naked human foot pressed into the aluminum floor of a boat that had been floating 200 yards from the nearest shore on a lake where we hadn't seen another person all day. I looked at my buddy, he looked at me, we both looked at the water, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it feels like to realize you're not at the top of the food chain. I need to set this up properly because the location matters. I was 36. My buddy Ryan and I were fishing at a reservoir in the Ozarks, southern Missouri, one of those man-made lakes that was created when they dammed a river back in the 60s. The lake is long and narrow and surrounded by dense forest on both sides. No houses on the water, no marina, no dock. You launch from a gravel ramp at the south end, and from there it's just you and the water and whatever lives in the trees. We had been coming here for 3 years. Every spring, same boat, same spots. We had never seen another person on the water, not once. That's why we liked it. It was ours. Or at least we thought it was. We launched at dawn, caught a few bass by 9. Around 10 we decided to anchor the boat in a cove and hike up to a creek that feeds into the lake about a quarter mile through the woods. Ryan had heard the creek was good for smallmouth. We anchored about 30 feet from shore in maybe 8 feet of water. We waded to the bank and hiked in. The creek was worth the walk. We fished there for almost 2 hours, caught nothing but had a good time. When we hiked back to the cove, the boat was exactly where we left it, floating quietly, rope taut, anchor holding. Everything looked normal from the bank. It wasn't until we waded out and climbed in that we saw it. Subscribe if you haven't. What we found in that boat changes everything. Also hit that like button. 1 second. The cooler was the first thing I noticed. It was a 45-quart Yeti that Ryan keeps strapped to the front bench. The lid was open, not knocked open by wind, flipped all the way back on its hinge. The 4 bass we had caught that morning were gone. The ice was still in there, but the fish were gone. No bones, no scales, no blood, just ice and empty space where 4 fish had been sitting 2 hours earlier. Ryan checked the tackle box. It had been on the rear bench next to the motor. Now it was on the middle seat, open. Nothing was missing that we could tell, but the trays inside had been rearranged. Someone had gone through it, picked things up, put them back, not carelessly, methodically, like they were examining each lure and hook and deciding whether they wanted it. Then I saw the footprint. It was in the bottom of the boat between the front and middle benches, a wet footprint on dry aluminum. The shape was unmistakable. Toes, heel, arch, a human foot, adult-sized, maybe a 10 or 11. The water around the print was still beading on the aluminum, fresh, recent. Whoever left it had been on the boat within the last few minutes, maybe while we were wading back through the shallows, maybe while we were climbing the bank, maybe while we were standing 30 feet away looking at the boat and thinking everything was fine. I crouched down and looked at the print more carefully. The toes were spread wide, wider than a normal footprint, like someone who had never worn shoes. The ball of the foot was calloused enough to leave a textured impression on the metal, and the heel was narrow, disproportionately narrow compared to the forefoot, like whatever made this print didn't have the same skeletal structure as a regular human foot. Ryan said, "It's just some guy swimming." I said, "What guy? We're the only people here." He didn't have an answer for that. Ryan grabbed the binoculars from under the seat and scanned the shoreline. Nothing. Dense trees all the way around the cove. No movement, no sound, no boats. We were alone on a lake in the middle of the Ozarks, and someone had swum to our anchored boat, climbed in, eaten our fish or taken them, gone through our tackle, and left, without us seeing or hearing anything. I looked at the water around the boat, clear enough to see the bottom in most spots. I couldn't see anyone, but the cove was deep in the middle, 20 feet, maybe more. The water went from transparent green near the shore to opaque black about 15 feet out. Anything could be under that black water. Anything could be looking up at the bottom of our hull right now. Ryan started the engine. Neither of us said a word. We pulled anchor and drove back to the ramp at full throttle. We loaded the boat and left. On the drive home, we tried to figure it out. A swimmer from another part of the lake, a camper we didn't know about, someone living in the woods. Every explanation required a person to be in a place where there were no people, no cars at the ramp, no other boats, no camps, no trails, nobody, but someone was there. Someone with bare feet who could swim at least 30 feet to an anchored boat in cold water, climb in without rocking it enough for us to notice from the bank, go through our stuff, take 4 fish and leave, without tools, without shoes, without making a sound. We haven't been back to that reservoir since. Ryan says he wants to go. I tell him maybe next year, but every time I think about going back, I see that footprint, wet and fresh on dry aluminum, and I think about the black water in the middle of that cove, and I think about what was watching us from underneath it while we stood on the bank 30 feet away, thinking we were alone.
My father and I used to night fish on the Swanee River in North Florida every summer. We did it for 15 years. I'm telling you that so you understand. We knew that river. We knew the sounds. We knew the wildlife. We knew what an alligator looks like at night when your headlamp catches its eyes. We knew what a manatee sounds like when it surfaces. We knew every normal thing that river could produce. What we heard on the night of August 14th, 2023 was not any of those things. And what we saw when we pointed the spotlight at the water is something my father refuses to talk about to this day. He is a 62-year-old retired firefighter who has pulled bodies out of burning buildings. He is not a man who refuses to talk about things, but he refuses to talk about this. We launched from a private ramp on my uncle's property around 8 p.m. It was a weeknight, nobody else on the water. The river was calm and black. When you night fish on the Swanee, you anchor in the deeper pools and cast toward the banks where the catfish feed. You use lanterns, you use bells on your rod tips. You sit in the dark and you wait. It's peaceful, the frogs, the insects, the occasional splash of something feeding. My dad and I have spent hundreds of hours sitting in a boat in the dark on that river. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Or it was. If this story is already making you uneasy, drop a comment. I want to know how many of you have been on dark water at night. Now let me tell you what happened. Around midnight, we were anchored in a deep pool about 2 miles downstream from the ramp. The river was maybe 80 feet wide at that point. Dense cypress on both banks, Spanish moss hanging low enough to touch the water. The lantern on the bow was casting a small circle of yellow light around the boat. Beyond that circle, it was absolute darkness. I had just rebaited my hook when my dad said, "Listen." I stopped moving. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual. Frogs, insects, the river. Then I noticed something. The frogs had stopped, not all of them, just the ones upstream, to our left. The sound was narrowing, like whatever was silencing them was moving downstream toward us. Within about 30 seconds, the silence reached our position. Every frog within earshot went quiet at the same time. Then the insects stopped. The entire river went dead silent. I have been on the Swanee at night over 100 times. It has never once gone silent like that. My dad reached for the spotlight without saying a word. He clicked it on and pointed it upstream. The beam cut through the dark and hit the water about 50 feet from our boat. At first there was nothing, just black water and the faint shapes of cypress knees along the bank. Then we both saw it, awake. moving toward us. Not a V-shaped wake like a boat or a swimming animal, a wide rolling displacement like something very large was moving just below the surface. The water was bulging upward in a mound that was maybe 4 feet across. It was moving slowly, maybe walking speed, coming directly at us. My dad kept the spotlight on it. I could see his hand shaking. The mound of water got within maybe 20 feet of the boat and stopped. The surface smoothed out. Whatever was under there had stopped moving, but I could see the water still trembling, vibrating, like whatever was beneath it was still there, just holding position. Right below the surface, 20 feet from our boat, my dad whispered, "Don't move." We sat there for what felt like 5 minutes. In reality, it was probably 1 or 2. The water stopped trembling. The mound flattened. I thought it had moved on. Then the boat moved, not rocked, moved. The entire boat shifted about 2 feet to the right. The anchor rope went taut. Something had bumped us from underneath. Not a collision, a push, deliberate, like something had placed itself under the hull and nudged us sideways. My dad dropped the spotlight. It landed in the bottom of the boat, still on. The beam pointed straight up into the trees. In the scattered light, I saw the water next to the boat churn, not splash, churn, like something massive was rolling just below the surface. I caught a glimpse of something dark, smooth, curved, wider than the boat. It rose maybe 6 inches above the waterline for 2 seconds and then sank. No sound, no splash. It just went back down, like it was showing us a piece of itself, just enough, just a taste. And then the silence broke. The frogs came back. The insects came back. The river returned to normal so fast it felt like a switch had been flipped. My dad started the engine without pulling the anchor. He cut the rope. We drove back to the ramp in the dark, going way too fast. Neither of us spoke. When we got to the ramp, he turned the boat lights on. There was a mark on the bottom of the hull, a scrape about 3 feet long, running from the center of the hull toward the stern. Whatever had pushed us had left a mark. The aluminum was scratched, not deeply, but visibly, in a single continuous line, like something hard and rough had dragged across the bottom. I ran my finger along it. The edges were sharp, fresh. Whatever made it had the texture of rock or shell or bone. Not skin, not scales, something harder. Alligators don't push boats. Manatees don't push boats. Catfish don't push boats. Nothing in the Swanee River that we know of is large enough to displace that much water and push a 16-foot aluminum boat sideways against an anchor. I've looked it up. I've spent hours researching every species documented in that river system. Sturgeon, gar, alligator, bull shark, which occasionally enters from the Gulf. Nothing fits. Nothing comes close to the size of what we saw break the surface. Nothing explains the width of that rolling wake or the force of that push. My dad sold the boat 2 months later. He told my mom he was getting too old for night fishing. He told me the truth in the driveway while my mom was inside. He said whatever was under that boat was bigger than the boat. He said he felt it through the hull, not just the bump, the weight of it, the mass pressing against the aluminum from below. He said it wasn't curious. It wasn't accidentally running into us. It was letting us know it was there, introducing itself. And he said if it had wanted to, it could have flipped us into that water in half a second. He said the push wasn't an accident, it was a choice, a gentle one. And he didn't want to be on the water the next time it made a different one. We don't talk about it, not because we've agreed not to, because every time one of us brings it up, we end up sitting in silence for a long time afterward, thinking about the dark water, thinking about the thing that lives at the bottom of it, thinking about the fact that we go to sleep every night in a house 4 miles from a river that contains something we don't have a name for, and it's still there, right now, tonight, sitting on the bottom of the Swanee in the dark, waiting for the next boat to anchor above it, waiting to decide whether to push or pull.
My neighbor Glenn went ice fishing on Lake of the Woods in northern Minnesota on a Saturday in January and came back on Sunday a different person, I don't mean that metaphorically. I don't mean he seemed shaken up or quieter than usual. I mean the man who walked out of the woods and back onto our road on Sunday evening was fundamentally not the same person who had left 30 hours earlier. Something about him had changed at a level I can't describe without sounding insane. His face was the same. His voice was the same. His clothes were the same, but the way he moved, the way he looked at things, the way he stood in his driveway staring at his own house like he had never seen it before. Something was wrong. Something is still wrong. And it has been 14 months, and Glenn has not gone back to normal. I need to explain who Glenn was before, because you need the contrast. He was 58, retired plumber, lived alone in the house next to mine for 9 years. He was the most predictable person I've ever known. Same schedule every day, coffee at 6, walks his dog Hank at 7 and 5, watches TV until 10, bed. He drove a red Ford truck. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation. He went to the same diner every Sunday for breakfast. Glenn was not a complicated man. He was steady, reliable, the kind of neighbor who shovels your driveway without being asked and then pretends he didn't do it. I liked Glenn. Everyone on the road liked Glenn. He told me on Friday he was going ice fishing the next morning. Solo trip. He had a spot on Lake of the Woods he went to every winter, about a 3-hour drive north. He said he'd be back Sunday afternoon. Normal. He did this every January. He loaded his truck Saturday morning before dawn and drove off. I didn't think about him again until Sunday evening when I heard his truck pull into his driveway. I looked out my window and watched him get out. That's when I noticed the first thing. He stood next to his truck for a very long time, maybe 3 minutes, just standing there, not unloading, not walking to the door, standing, looking at his house. His head was tilted slightly to the right, like he was studying it, like he was seeing it for the first time. Hank was barking inside. Glenn didn't react. He just stood there. Then he walked to his front door. Slowly. He reached for the handle and stopped. He looked at his own hand on the handle like he wasn't sure how it worked. Then he opened the door and went inside. Hank stopped barking immediately. Not gradually, immediately, like the dog had been waiting for Glenn. And then, the second he saw him, decided barking was no longer appropriate. The next morning I was getting my mail, and Glenn walked out. He said good morning. His voice was the same. The words were right, but the timing was wrong. There was a delay between when he saw me and when he spoke, like he was processing what the correct response was before producing it. I said, "Morning, Glenn. How was the fishing?" He looked at me. His eyes held mine for too long. Not in an aggressive way, in a scanning way, like he was reading something off my face. Then he said it was good. 3 words. It was good. Glenn normally would have talked for 10 minutes about the fishing, the conditions, the bait, how many he caught, whether the ice was thick enough. He lived for those details. This time he said it was good and walked back inside. Hank didn't come out with him. Hank always came out with him. Over the next few weeks things got worse, not dramatically, incrementally. Glenn stopped going to the diner. He stopped walking Hank. I saw Hank in the yard a few times, but Glenn was never with him. The dog had changed too. Hank used to bound across the yard and come to the fence wagging his tail when he saw me. Now he stayed close to the house, low to the ground, ears back. I called out to him once, and he looked at me, and then looked at Glenn's front door, and then went inside through the dog door, like he was checking whether it was safe to interact with me. Glenn's schedule shifted. He used to keep a regular routine. Now his lights were on at strange hours, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I would wake up for water and see the glow from his living room window. Not the blue flicker of a TV, a steady warm light, like he was sitting in a lit room doing nothing. I stopped by one afternoon to check on him. I knocked. He opened the door. He was wearing a flannel shirt I didn't recognize. Not one of the three, a new one. He smiled. It was the right shape for a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. It sat on his face like something he had put on. I asked if he was okay. He said, "I'm fine." I asked about Hank. He paused. Then he said, "Hank is fine." I looked past him into the house. Hank was lying in the hallway, not on his bed, on the floor, in the middle of the hallway, facing the front door, watching me through the gap. His eyes were wide, his body was flat. He looked like a dog who was afraid to move. I didn't go inside. I don't know why. Something in my gut told me not to cross that threshold. I told Glenn to let me know if he needed anything. He said okay, same delay, same scanning look. Then he closed the door. I walked back to my house and I stood in my kitchen and I tried to figure out what was wrong with my neighbor. Was it a stroke? Early dementia, depression, PTSD from something that happened on the ice? All of those were possible. All of those were rational, but none of them explained Hank. None of them explained why a dog, who had worshipped his owner for 9 years, was now lying flat on the floor, watching him like a prisoner watches a guard. Animals know. That's what people say. Animals know when something is wrong. Hank knew. Hank knew from the moment Glenn walked through that front door on Sunday night. And 14 months later, Hank still knows. He still won't leave Glenn's side, but he doesn't go near him either. He follows him through the house at a distance, close enough to watch, far enough to run. That's not how a dog behaves around its owner. That's how a dog behaves around something wearing its owner. I've talked to other neighbors. They've noticed it too. Carol across the road said Glenn waved at her last week, but the wave was wrong. She said it looked rehearsed, like he was imitating the gesture rather than performing it. Tom down the street said Glenn walked past his house at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, just walking, on the road, in the dark. No flashlight, no coat, in January. Tom said he watched from his window, and Glenn walked to the end of the road and stood there for about 10 minutes, looking at the woods. Then he turned around and walked home. Tom said his movements were fluid, but mechanical, like a body running on a different operating system. I don't know what happened on that lake. I don't know what Glenn found out there on the ice, or what found him, but the man who drove back on Sunday is not the man who drove away on Saturday, and whatever came back from Lake of the Woods is still learning how to be him. It's getting better at it every day. The smile is more convincing now. The timing of his responses is closer to normal. The wave is almost right, almost, but not quite. And Hank still won't go near him. And I think as long as Hank keeps his distance, I should too. Those were 3 true fishing horror stories. If you made it to the end, tell me which one is going to haunt you. Drop it in the comments. If you've experienced something on the water that you can't explain, leave your story below. The most disturbing ones get featured in future videos. Subscribe if you haven't. New stories every week. Share this with anyone who fishes alone. They need to hear this. And the next time you're out on a boat on a quiet lake and the water goes still and the frogs go silent, pay attention. Something just showed up, and it's not a fish,